Гара Келети или източна гара в Будапеща е вратата между Централна Европа и Балканите и основен възел на новия път на Куприната. Освен стоки и хора, влаковете тук пренасят и политически зависимости. От Будапеща през Белград до Скопие, Солун и Пирея.
Някои наричат китайската икономическа експанзия на Балканите и Централна Европа просто бизнес, други – стратегически пробив. Едно е сигурно – регионът отваря врати към изтока с любезното съдействие на тукашните авторитарни лидери. Унгария, макар и в страни от Балканите, има решаваща роля в процеса.
One person talking. Instead of playing by the rules and the law, Orbán began to look for an alternative, turning to the east for financial support for his projects.
I think the most important thing to mention is that Viktor Orbán has been working on building an illiberal regime for the past 15 years. He's been talking about it very explicitly for many years. And this illiberal regime, he finds it utmost important to find international alliances. So the Hungarian foreign policy and its close relationship to China is not only about China, but there is a bigger picture. And that bigger picture includes close relationship to other illiberal or authoritarian leaders, including Turkish leader Erdogan, Mr. Putin of Russia, Netanyahu of Israel, or for example Bolsonaro of Brazil as long as he was in power.
След 2010 година в Унгария се развива нов тип авторитарно управление. Днес режимът се нуждае от пари, за да оцелява. Вървят ли ръка за ръка инвестициите на Пекин с зависимости?
Of course, China is particularly important because it's one of the largest economies of the world, and since the Hungarian economy has been in trouble for many years, especially since the at least decrease in the amount of EU funds flowing into Hungary, the Prime Minister obviously hopes for a bigger Chinese stake, a bigger Chinese role in running Hungary's economy, especially in form of Chinese investment flowing into the country. So far, I think these hopes have fallen short. The Hungarian economy is still in trouble, and the Chinese investment is not saving us from any further problems.
Our system is based on the logic of what we inherited from the socialist system. In the socialist system, you had a social contract saying that you have a job, you have money, you have a weekend house, you have a certain amount of freedom, but in exchange, you shut up. You don't talk about politics.
Hungary, after 50 years under Soviet occupation, was prepared for anything except to once again seek ties with the East. Historical experience shows that Hungary has always joined the wrong side. After the changes of the 1990s, it seemed that for the first time we would choose the right direction by joining the European Union.
Right now, what they do is that tell you that, okay, we can find you a job in a factory or somewhere else, but in exchange, we want your support, and we want you to don't criticize the system. Now, in order to do that, you need to bring in foreign investments, or you have to make your economy better. Now, with an authoritarian system that we have, you can't let the economy grow on its own because that would create opposition and funding for the opposition. So they rather choose the other way, that they bring in foreign investment, Chinese, Russian, Korean, whatever comes, at whatever price, so they can tell the people that, yeah, we brought in those Chinese manufacturer, those Korean manufacturer, the Russian manufacturer, whomever. And it worked until we had the EU funds, and it does not work anymore.
Един от знаковите проекти, в които Пекин участва активно, е паневропейският коридор 10, дефиниран през 90-те години на миналия век. Макар този коридор днес да е приоритетен за Европейския съюз, големи части от него се строят чрез дългове от Китай. Китайските инвестиции в Южния европейски коридор и по маршрута Пирея-Белград-Будапеща са по-малък приоритет спрямо инвестицията в директната ЖП връзка между Шанхай и Хамбург, открита през 2021 година. Цената за превоз на стоки е съпоставима, но по ЖП линията до Хамбург отнема до 18 дни, а по море до Пирея – 32. Основният коридор на новия път на Куприната изглежда е директната връзка от Китай към Хамбург и Ротердам, съответно коридорът от Гърция до Унгария играе второстепенна роля.
Намираме се пред представителството на една от най-големите и най-стари китайски банки – Bank of China в Будапеща. Всъщност какви условия стоят зад отпусканите от тук средства?
Заемите и инвестициите ли са единственият въпрос, който засяга Унгария?
China is important for Orban because he can learn a lot from it. For example, about dictatorship, facial recognition software, and so on. Orban sees relatively a lot of money in China. He realized that he could not get money from Europe just like that. In fact, he needs money. He needs loans. That is why China is important for Orban.
What I see is that they don't treat Orban and the Hungarian nation as equal partners, and why would they? They have over 1 billion people, we have 9.5. They have the world's largest, the second largest economy, we have somewhere in the middle. So we are just a small dot on the map for China, and we can feel that. When Xi Jinping was here, they sent hundreds and hundreds of Chinese, they call themselves activists, who were monitoring the way that the convoy of the Chinese leader was moving on. And they were monitoring means that if you were having a flag on your back or in your hand, they came to you asking you, what kind of flag is that? Because if it's a Taiwanese flag or it's a Tibetan flag, they will try to take it away from you. In the European Union city, in a capital in 2024, which is absolutely absurd, but this is how they treat, I think, every European country. It's the respect and the comfortableness of the leader is much more important than international relations for them.
I think the Chinese investment from the Hungarian perspective is on the one hand an economic tool, and on the other hand, of course, it is also a tool in the hands of Mr. Orban to maintain his regime. Hungarian foreign policy right now shouldn't be even called Hungarian foreign policy. I believe it's more like the foreign policy of Mr. Orban and his regime, and regime survival is the most important and primary priority of all of these regimes like that. That's very important. From a Chinese perspective, I think China's influence in Hungary and in many other Central European countries is like a mirage, because it's connected to one single leader, just like in the case of previous Czech president, previous Romanian prime ministers, previous Polish government, and also in Hungary, China does not have a structural influence. The society, the public, is not really fond of China. The media is not really fond of China. The Hungarian businesses are not very successful in China. So what I mean by that should this government lose its power at the elections next year, there is a very fair chance that China's influence would disappear maybe overnight.
Заемите от Китай идват с скрити клаузи. Често финансовите споразумения служат като инструменти за сложна политическа обвързаност.
Китайските финансови операции в Европа почти винаги остават извън публичния контрол. Нашата роля е да разкрием дали клаузите и лихвите създават изгода или са в противовес на интереса на гражданите. Не само на унгарските, а и на сръбските и на македонските.
Условията по китайските заеми за ЖП линията Будапеща-Белград бяха засекретени за 10 години. Проектът на стойност близо 4 милиарда евро беше поверен на фирми, близки до Орбан и Вучич. Финансира се основно през кредити от китайската експортно-импортна банка, която покрива около 80% от стойността на строителството и в двете държави.
Now, it's being done like, I don't know, 5 to 10 times higher per kilometer than in Serbia, and Serbia is not a corruption-free country either. But the bigger problem is that it's done by Chinese companies with Chinese resources for Chinese purposes from a Chinese loan. And we had a feasibility study about that, and it says that approximately 700 years or more is needed for the investment to have a profit at the end. And that's not, I would call like a good investment. Still they do it. And the question comes that, okay, but why? And the answer is that the Chinese construction firm has a Hungarian partner, and it's that Hungarian partner is owned by the childhood friend of Orban, who is sometimes referred to as the money man of our prime minister. On the other hand, we have an infrastructural problem, and because this line just evades all the major towns and cities between Budapest and the border. So from a logistical perspective, it doesn't make any sense to us. If we want to renovate that route, then it should just go to the cities. It does not. So we have a major issue with it, and but it's, as far as I know, it's at the end of the construction, and it's just a huge, huge loan that even my children and grandchildren are going to pay.
Приятелят на Орбан, който строи унгарската част от ЖП линията Будапеща-Белград, се казва Льорин Шмешарош. Бившият водопроводчик днес е един от най-богатите хора в Унгария. Консорциум, ръководен от негова компания, спечели търг за строителството на унгарския участък от ЖП линията. Партньорството включва и китайски компании.
For Hungary, this project simply makes no sense. This railway line is not very important for us. Very few people depend on it, around 10,000. For trains coming from Serbia, the current infrastructure is completely sufficient. Of course, some renovation is necessary, but the project has become monstrously expensive and is being carried out non-transparently. We do not know what the contract contains. We only know that it is a very costly loan and that we have to pay high interest to the benefit of China. We know that Hungarian oligarchs working with Chinese companies are making large amounts of money. There is evidence that the quality is not good. They are using old materials, old rails. This is very problematic for Hungary. The government says that when many trains pass through Hungary, this will bring in money. But let's see how much money will it really bring. Experts say that what we are paying now will be earned back in a century.
I try to be as PC as I can. Made in China is still not regarded as the equivalent of quality. So when we hear that the Chinese are making a railway line, few people are surprised that the quality is lacking. So it's not, mainly financial is the issue with it, but it's just the expectations is so low about quality that it's not the major concern.
Инвестициите в ЖП коридор номер 10 стимулират търговията, но създават и опасни обвързаности.
So normally, if the project would have been delivered as it was meant to, then I would see some controversies over there. What I mean here is very simple. According to the original plans, the so-called train control system should have been provided by the Chinese side. But there has been a struggle for many years because the Chinese side, the Chinese entrepreneurs and companies were not able to deliver the technology that is needed in Europe. So eventually, as far as we know, because this is all based on speculation and rumors, but as far as we know, right now there will be a European company to deliver the train control system, at least on the Hungarian section. I'm not familiar with the issue in Romania, in Serbia, so I'm not familiar with the issue in Serbia, and of course not in Macedonia or Greece, but of course it is a problem.
The Belgrade-Budapest railway, it's not worth for the Hungarians, but it's worth for the Chinese.
Но инфраструктурата не е всичко. Китайската мека сила прониква през академични и културни канали. Емблематичен пример е проектът за университет в Удан в Будапеща на стойност близо $2 милиарда. $1,5 милиарда трябваше да бъдат осигурени чрез китайски заеми.
When the idea of building the Fudan University came to light, it was revealed by an investigative media outlet. After that, everyone began to research and look for information on whether such a university could operate in the democratic world. Unlike other Chinese campuses abroad, here in Hungary the state was to play an important role in the construction and financing of the university.
Yes, they wanted to have a Fudan University here in Budapest, but we managed to stop it. So we didn't want for the Chinese Communist Party to come to Budapest with a university with spies, possibly with spies as well. we wanted for the Hungarian students colleges. So these were the question. Colleges for Hungarian students or Chinese university? And colleges for the Hungarian students won. And Viktor Orbán has been defeated again. We Hungarians, we don't want to live in a Chinese or Russian type autocracy. We would like to live in a civic European democracy. So this is the need of the Hungarians.
There are few such campuses outside China. This fact alone showed us, and to some extent it has been proven, that Chinese lecturers and sometimes even students are often secret agents whose task is to gather information about the respective country. It is no surprise that few countries allow Fudan International on their territory. 2 of them are in Asia, and the only one in Europe is the United Kingdom. But in that case, it's about partnerships.
What is concerning that in the past couple of months there have been some news that the Hungarian government started cooperating with the Chinese side in the fields of surveillance, especially when it comes to AI-enhanced facial recognition cameras that have been deployed around at least Budapest in the past couple of weeks and months. That is a little bit more concerning because we don't know that what kind of data is being sent back to China.
I could understand your point that, we can be concerned by China, but maybe we can be more concerned about, a few weeks ago there was almost Pride here, which was banned, but then the mayor of Budapest decided to make a Pride of Budapest, so they just took on the streets, hundreds of thousands of people. It was a great demonstration against Orbán, basically. Before that, message from government was that they will use face recognition softwares and send fines to those who will attend. I'm afraid those are Chinese systems. I'm afraid that kind of inspiration from China is way more dangerous than a railway. I'm afraid that idea not to let people mention Tibet when Chinese delegation is here is way more problematic than a railway.
They were having 2 Chinese police stations, we can say that, here in Budapest. This was a network of over 100 countries where they had these illegal police stations. And their official purpose was that if a Chinese person needs some document renewed or they have any kind of administrative problem, they can go there. They don't have to travel back to China and they can fix their issue over there. But we also know that they were also here to monitor dissident activity. So if something happened in the Uyghur Muslim territories, and there was a small protest of 5 to 6 people in some squares, there was one Chinese guy 15 meters away in the bush taking pictures of them. So they are very closely monitoring all the application activities in WeChat, in real life, and they are just sending a message to their own that you cannot run from the Chinese Communist Party, we are watching you.
Унгарското правителство е подписало тайни договори с Китай, включително в сферата на вътрешната сигурност. Какви рискове носи това за свободите на унгарските граждани и за демократичния контрол върху властта? Не е ли най-голямата опасност формирането на бъдещия елит по китайския авторитарен модел? Каква цена ще бъде платена за китайските пари?
Zuerst war es ganz eindeutig ein Geheimnis. Und dann hat man über...
Yes, at first this was definitely kept secret. People talked about one agreement, but there are actually 2. One is quite normal, allowing Chinese police officers to come and assist in the tourist areas. This is in fact standard, but the problem lies elsewhere. Many people believe that these police officers won't be here to help tourists, but rather to monitor Chinese workers. The other agreement is even worse. It was classified and it took a long time before anyone could even glance at it. It involves accepting know-how from China, i.e., Chinese specialists coming to Hungary. Naturally, this is dangerous because it means accepting Chinese facial recognition software and using this system. In the Chinese dictatorship, facial recognition technology allows every step people take to be monitored. This is very dangerous. Meanwhile, in the spring, a law was passed in Hungary allowing this system against participants in banned demonstrations. Until now, it could only be used in exceptional cases for serious crimes, for criminals, for murderers, but now it can be used against members of the opposition.
Mitglieder von der Opposition sind.
В последните години Пекин финансира откриването на така наречените конфуциански институти в Будапеща, Белград, Будва, Скопие, Сараево, Баня Лука, Подгорица, София и други градове, чиято официална цел е да преподават китайски език и култура. На практика обаче те могат да действат и като мрежа за набиране на местни кадри и идентифициране на значими преподаватели, студенти, журналисти, с които китайските власти поддържат контакти и предлагат стипендии, обиколки и участие в семинари. Така се създава широка база от хора с симпатии към Пекин.
The amount of these NGOs, like Chinese dance organization, Chinese New Moon organization, Chinese traditional medicine organization, and so on and so on. We have so many of them compared to the size and population of the country that it's ridiculous. I discovered that there was a Chinese guy here in Budapest who is a martial art master, and he was very closely aligned with the Chinese police, one version, and they were also teaching Hungarian police, and I said that, okay, but what is the basis of this cooperation? And I asked the Ministry of Domestic Affairs, the Secretary of State in the Parliament, that, okay, but what's up with this guy? And he said, I don't know, I never met him. And then I pulled out a picture that this is your ministry, this is your office, this is the guy, and this is you, so please, let's start again, but they never answered. So the Hungarian government knows that from a Hungarian perspective, this is quite shady and they don't like it, so they try to cover it up as much as they can.
В момента резиденцията на Виктор Орбан се намира в този район, в един бивш манастир. Той изпълнява задълженията си от тук, но не като монах, а като министър-председател.
Чий проект е Орбан? На унгарския народ, на чужди сили или на собствената му властова амбиция? И каква е крайната цел на политическия му модел? Превръща ли се неговият режим в троянски кон на Китай, в Европейския съюз и къде се пресичат китайските интереси с руското влияние в региона?
That is a very good question. Indeed, this is not a project of the Hungarian people. I think it is clear that the sole purpose is money and wealth. We didn't know this before, but now we do. But we also know that Orban doesn't steal only for that reason. He needs much more money in order not to end up in prison. He has stolen so much that he cannot stop. In the beginning, he needed power for the sake of money. Now he needs money for the sake of power. Sadly, we must say that he is likely serving the Russian state and Russian interests. His policy clearly supports the Russians. There was a major shift after 2010. Before that, he was strongly against Russia, against Russian politics, against the dictatorship. Around 2009, the big change took place. Since then, he has firmly sided with the Russians. The question is whether he was bought or blackmailed. We don't know for sure, but it is highly likely that he was bought and with that blackmailed.
One aspect that is very, very important and many people downplay it. When Orban goes to Brussels or wherever in the West, he's treated like a pariah, someone who is, yeah, you are here because you are an EU Prime Minister, but we don't want you here. When he goes to China, when he goes to Russia, when he goes to wherever, Iran, red carpets, trumpets, big parade. And a man who has been charged for close to 20 years and his ego is so corrupted, that's an important factor.
In fact, Viktor Orban does not serve only China. Hungary takes Moscow's side in the war between Russia and Ukraine. It is ironic that Orban, who presents himself as the political heir of Imre Nagy and claims to share his ideas, has turned 180 degrees and is increasingly aligning himself with two regimes, the Chinese and the Russian.
Orban's interest is not to destroy the EU, but make it more loose, more bilateral instead of this multilateral thing where he cannot control the narrative. And that aligns with the Chinese and especially the Russian interests with a weaker European Union. because if there is a strong European Union, then there is an alternative for the Chinese and especially the Russian citizens saying that, yeah, our regime is not good, we're going to move there or we're going to want what they have. If the EU is struggling with inner issues, then it's good for the Kremlin and good for Beijing. So I wouldn't say they are so closely cooperating, but interests are aligning, and that meets and that results in certain loans, investments and meetings that we're just not proud of.
През последните години Виктор Орбан и неговото правителство се намесват много активно в делата на Балканите. Увеличават влиянието си в Черна гора, в Босна и Херцеговина, в Сърбия и особено в последните месеци в Северна Македония. Само през изминалата година правителството в Скопие взе заем от Будапеща на стойност около 500 милиона евро. Впоследствие се оказа, че средствата не са били нито в евро, нито в форинти, а в китайски юани.
Средствата за Северна Македония бяха представени като помощ от европейска държава, а всъщност канализират китайското финансиране. Заемът за Скопие е част от 1 милиард евро, взет от Унгария няколко месеца по-рано от консорциум на китайски банки. Този факт се прикриваше и от двете страни. Будапеща използва за пренасочване на кредита своята агенция за държавен дълг. Правителството на Християн Мицкоски вече получи втората част от парите. Половин милиард би трябвало да бъде използван за финансиране на общини и предприятия. 500 милиона евро пък отидоха за изплащане на стари дългове. Македонското правителство на практика рефинансира своя дълг с по-евтин кредит. Контролът обаче остава много слаб и създава условия за мащабна корупция. Китай чрез Унгария и Сърбия изгражда мрежа от авторитарна солидарност в целия регион.
What I mentioned before that Mr. Orban has been working hard to build this illiberal regime, that is one part of the story. The other side of the story is that in order to maintain his regime, he needs a relatively weak Europe that is more based on sovereign states than on a federal type of Europe. Therefore, for his own sake, Mr. Orban is not interested in a strong and unified European integration that could, put pressure on his regime, that could endanger his re-election next year. And the Chinese side, I don't think they really need to do that.
I think the biggest challenge and the biggest problem is this new wave of populist dictators who are not in a traditional way oppressing people or their opposition, but rather using international organizations, state organizations, rules, legislation to just simply kill off the opposition. So while we thought that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the dictators are just going out of fashion, they are just changing and they are morphing into something new. And I'm afraid that politics haven't really found the answer to this challenge yet, and that's a big problem.
It's been a while. I think it was back in 2017 when I was visiting China and I had a conversation with the Chinese foreign policy experts and EU experts, and somehow those Hungarian vetoes were discussed by us when Hungary vetoed anti-Chinese moves by the European Union. And to my greatest surprise, the Chinese side told me that they are very grateful, they really recognize these Hungarian moves, but could we please stop it? And I was really surprised by that because I assumed that this is good for China, and it turned out that the Chinese were not happy about it because it really helped Western European critiques to point fingers at Hungary and also at China, showing that, you see, we told you the Chinese try to divide and rule Europe through Hungary. While it was not the Chinese side who kind of poked the Hungarian government to please veto this or block that, it was the Hungarian side doing it on a voluntary basis. So from the Chinese perspective, it's really hard to tell when China is interested in a unified Europe. There are cases when China would really love to see a stronger Europe, and not a very strong one, but a stronger Europe. And in many other cases, of course, China does try to divide Europe, just like the United States is doing that.
Въпросът е кой ще плаща сметката, когато дойде времето за погасяването на заемите към Китай.
Gestures such as the plan to build a university campus and the Belgrade-Budapest railway line are in fact services to China, aimed at gaining its trust and receiving more money in the future. Orban has to accept the fact that Hungary is receiving less and less funding from the European Union and has no other way to secure similar financial support.
За разлика от Унгария, която все още е част, поне на документи, от Европейската система за контрол и баланс, Сърбия играе на границата, без регулации, без отчетност. От това се възползват и Пекин, и Москва.
IFI-me, the two systems, Orban's and Vucic's, are hybrid regimes, a mix of democracy and dictatorship. They know it's not good to be completely alone in Europe, and that's why they are such good friends. Naturally, both of them support Russia and are also dependent on it.
A magyar elnökség meggyőződése szerint
we need to accelerate the accession of the Western Balkans. This is a key issue for Europe, integrating it economically in terms of security and also geopolitically. It is advantageous for the European Union. We need to focus in particular on Serbia. Without Serbia joining the EU, we cannot stabilize the Balkans. As long as Serbia is not a member of the European Union, the Balkans remain an unstable region.
В тази схема китайското влияние се чувства не само уютно, то се разгръща без ограничения. Сърбия е страната с най-високо равнище на китайски инвестиции в региона. Освен че дава заеми, Пекин използва свои фирми и работници за реализацията на проектите. Тоест, парите се връщат обратно при азиатския гигант по няколко линии. Китай гради и притежава мини фабрики, финансира пътища, строи мостове, но цената не се измерва само в пари. Сръбският опит с Китай варира от обвинения в корупция до експлоатация, замърсяване на въздуха, почвата и водата. Особено тежки обвинения за нечовешки условия на труд бяха отправени при построяването на китайската фабрика за гуми в Зранянин от внесени китайски и виетнамски работници. Организации пък предупреждават за увеличени случаи на рак и респираторни заболявания, причинени от липсата на контрол върху стоманодобивното предприятие в Смедерево, включително сред работниците.
Инфраструктурни свои инвестиции на Балкану.
In all its infrastructure investments in the Balkans, China wields significant political and geostrategic power. China provides favorable loans from its banks to the Serbian government, but on the condition that Serbia accepts infrastructure projects, railways, bridges, highways, that China builds and which Serbia benefits from owning. This is unquestionable. At the same time, these transport corridors connect to three key mineral sites, one for lithium in western Serbia and Bor and Majdanpek in eastern Serbia near the Bulgarian and Romanian borders. Meanwhile, there is a rather mysterious area that gets very little attention. The gold deposits in the region where I was born, Homoja. The company Dundee is mentioned, which plans to mine gold using cyanide, again an outdated technology. In short, this is an area where the land has remained as God created nature before humans appeared. Not to mention the beauty and springs that we have there.
Koja će da luži, da rudari zlato sa cijanidom. Opet zastarala tehnologija. U jednom delu gde je priroda ostala onakva kakva je Bog stvorio u tom premordijalnom sistemu pre nego što je sam svet stvoren. Da ne govorimo koje lepote tamo imamo i kakve izvore.
Съюзът между Пекин и Белград има и лице и тяло. Един от най-символичните проекти, гарата в Нови Сад, рухна буквално и преносно. Козирката й се срути на 1 ноември в 2024 година. 16 души загинаха. Строителството при реновацията на гарата няколко месеца по-рано беше поверено на китайски фирми, а разходите покрити с държавна гаранция, а отговорността затрупана под бетонните отломки. Сръбската прокуратура разследва нередности, допуснати по време на строителството на този сръбски участък от ЖП линията Белград-Будапеща. Двама бивши министри, Томислав Момирович и Горан Весич, са замесени в мащабна корупция. Истинската зависимост се гради там, където контролът не е видим. В договорите, в политиката, в ресурсите. Проектите с китайско участие в Сърбия са много. Автомагистрала Милош Велики, мостът Пупин над река Дунав, обходното шосе на Белград.
trebaju oni koji su na vlasti da vrlo jasno razmisle šta ostavljamo sljedećim generacijama. Minerali koji se uzimaju idu direktno za Kinu.
Those in power must carefully consider what we are leaving for future generations. The minerals being extracted go directly to China. This is well known, yet no one can control this process because the contracts for Bor and Majdanpek remain completely secret, seen only by the government officials and those who signed them. These minerals are exported by the Chinese to China. For this reason, it's unclear what other potentially valuable minerals, beyond copper, silver, and gold, might be included. It's possible that many other minerals are involved, and no one can oversee this. On one hand, we take on obligations and receive infrastructure in return, which is undeniable. But this debt must be repaid. Minerals are extracted and used outside Serbia, while minerals of questionable origin are imported into Serbia itself, causing environmental damage. Yet Serbia still must repay its debt. Political relations are being established that I believe are acceptable. But if we look back at claims made by some analysts that Serbia has become a mining colony, these assertions seem to carry some truth.
Dobija na težini i izgleda da ima istine u njoj.
Китай инвестира милиарди за фабрики и заводи в автомобилната промишленост. Дебрецен, Сегет, Печ, Мишколц и други унгарски градове.
Китайският гигант CATL съкращава десетки местни работници, унгарци, без обяснение и реални причини. На тяхно място идват по-ниско платени служители от Китай.
Idea to push Hungarian economy in order to serve Chinese battery factories and EV factories was way more dangerous idea than a railroad. Of course, BYD is building a huge factory in Zagreb. CATL just announced they will not build second phase of their battery factory, which is a bad news, you know. But even if they build, what will happen with the water resources? You know? Those are issues for concern more than that Saloniki-Budapest railway, from my perspective.
Of course, given the fact that in the past couple of years China has invested a tremendous amount of money into Hungary, at least $15 billion, and we are still counting, it means that now China has an important economic influence in Hungary, but we shouldn't forget that that Chinese presence, economic presence in the Hungarian economy is not very well embedded into the net of the Hungarian economy, because it's mostly one single sector connected to e-mobility, so electric vehicles and the batteries that are needed for those electric vehicles. So it's not connected to Hungarian suppliers, it's not connected to the Hungarian economy in a broader sense, but it's more like an enclave in the Hungarian economy, and therefore I think its influence is also limited. But of course we will see later on, because most of these Chinese factories that have been announced in the past 2-3 years are not operating yet, so their real impact on the Hungarian economy will remain to be seen in the upcoming few years.
We don't have any problem with commercial ties towards the east, towards China, so it's completely good. But it has to be profitable for the Hungarians. And almost everything what the Chinese are doing here is just not profitable for us, it's profitable for them. There's the BYD factory, for example, close to Szeged. It's one of the biggest Hungarian city. It's disputed whether it's good or bad. It's good for the Hungarian workforce because they can have a job somewhere, but is it good for the European car industry, for example, if a Chinese electronic vehicle factory comes here to Hungary? Maybe not. So we have to look at it from a higher level and higher perspective.
We have auto manufacturing, car battery manufacturing, battery reusing or disassembling it, which is, it's interesting because Hungary, as I told you, the FDI is quite important for the regime to be maintained, but Hungary's key industrial sector was auto manufacturing with Germans mainly, the German cars. Now they brought in the Chinese competitors, which is kind of, it doesn't make really sense because you're creating and supporting the competition for your own product. Not to mention that Hungary is lacking electricity. We are on the way of desertification, so our land is drying up. What do you need for batteries besides rare earth, water and electricity? So it makes absolutely no sense to focus on it, but we see it in our industrial production that it doesn't bring, because the auto industry is going down right now. It's in a valley or at the bottom of the wave, so it's not going well. And it's the problem also is that this system attracts investment by minimizing state intervention. So no environmental concerns, no financial concerns, nothing like that. But when you are bringing in the battery manufacturing and you are reducing environmental control, that's a recipe for disaster. And we are expecting that to come quite soon.
The CATL, it's a battery factory. It's close to Debrecen. This is the second biggest Hungarian town. And the problem with that is that this factory doesn't really care about the basic needs of the people. What I'm thinking is that the water supply. So, we have got summers like this, like 35, 40 degrees. There's dry soil in Hungary. Not really much water. We need water. So these big factories, huge factories come to Hungary, and they're just fed with this water instead of the people. So we should be more protective with our natural resources, as water, for example. So these are the problems with these kind of Chinese investments.
След инфраструктурата и технологиите следват медиите.
Let's be blunt about this. This is an authoritarian regime. This is not yet Russia and not yet Belarusia, but the recipe comes from Moscow. So Viktor Orbán tends to close up media platforms, tends to buy out medias, and also tends to ban freedom of speech.
For a while, the Hungarian opposition did not really take seriously the fact that Orbán was opening up to China and siding with Russia, because it seemed as though he was spitting on his own political legacy. Most Hungarians, especially after the regime change, rejected such behaviour and support for dictatorial regimes like the one in China. Orbán follows a political strategy entirely shaped by his own perspective, and he executes it very skillfully. Since 2010, he has been running a political machine and has managed to shift public opinion on this issue. It's hard for me to believe that this actually happened, but it is a fact. Unfortunately, few remember how the system actually operated during communism and how propaganda was spread back then. Many people did not realize this before the transition, and now the state media operates in the very same way.
In the Hungarian state media, you have Russian fake news, fake informations for years. So they just get those information from the Kremlin and they distribute it to the Hungarians. About the war, for example, they use the same language what Putin does concerning the war in Ukraine, like this special military operation, for example. But they're using this kind of language, and they're using an anti-Ukrainian and, of course, an anti-European communication and narrative all the time. And this is from the Hungarian taxpayers' money. So I think this is what we cannot and we shouldn't accept, and we will never accept.
Китай финансира и подпомага медии в няколко страни от Балканския регион, както пряко, така и косвено, чрез партньорства, съвместни проекти, дарение на техника и обучение на журналисти. В Северна Македония все повече медии говорят с чужд дневен ред. Голяма част от тях се финансират през Унгария. Според анализатори това е хибриден модел за медийна инвазия. Унгарски капитали, просръбски наративи, а понякога все по-често китайски цели. Съветникът на Орбан Арпад Хабони и бизнесмените Петър Шац и Агнеса Дамик имаха основна роля в превземането на множество македонски медии – списания, вестници, уебсайтове и портали. Именно тези с най-остра антиевропейска, проруска и прокитайска риторика.
Поодамна се присутни, финансиски импликации во Македонија, финансирање на македонски медиуми од страна на Унгарија и Србија.
The funding of Macedonian media outlets by Hungary and Serbia has been a long-standing reality. Most recently, we have witnessed the involvement of MTEL, a Serbian telecommunications company backed by suspicious Chinese capital, which has entered the Macedonian market over the past year. I am confident that the Macedonian intelligence services will act to prevent any misuse of these financial flows originating from Hungary and Serbia in the context of media financing in the Republic of Macedonia. It is essential that such matters be handled in full accordance with the law, ensuring that no form of dependence on these states is allowed to develop, so that this influence, this propaganda created and spread through certain media in Macedonia, will not hinder integration into Europe. All of this must be monitored under the watchful eye of the Macedonian intelligence services.
Македонија дека нема да се дозволи тоа да биде на злоупотреба и на кочење на македонските процеси и интегрирање во Европа. Сето тоа треба да биде следено под будното око на македонските служби и недозволување на пенетрација на странски капитал преку медиумската сфера.
Северна Македония е държава, преминала през твърде много перипети и години нищо правене по пътя към евроинтеграция. Но в сянката на Китай, Унгария и Сърбия, страната се оказва в капан, от който трудно се излиза, дори когато вратата към Европейския съюз е отворена. Със заем от близо 600 милиона евро от Ексимбанк, магистрала Миладиновци-Щип свърза Скопие с източните райони. Въпреки че пътят бе завършен през 2018 година, погасяването на дълга заемаше значителна част от бюджета, оставяйки малко ресурс за социални и други нужди. Магистралата Кичево-Охрид е част от същия китайски пакет от около над 200 милиона евро, изпълнен от друга китайска компания. Разследвания показаха, че много от виадуктите и тунелите не отговарят на първоначалните срокове и разходи. Множество обекти остават недовършени. Задлъжнялостта расте без реална полза за местната икономика. С заем от 80 милиона евро от китайски банки пък бе построена и газовата топлоцентрала Козяк, която работи от 2004 година. Високите разходи за поддръжка, зависимостта от чуждестранните резервни части и емисиите на парникови газове я направиха спорен екологичен проект.
Уште во 1994 година во владата на Бранко Црвенковски беше земен кинески кредит за изградба на хидроелектраната Козјак и од тогаш некои коруптивни скандали се влечат поврзани со киневски банки.
In 1994, the government of Branko Crvenkovski took a loan from China for the construction of the Kozjak hydroelectric power plant. And since then, corruption scandals linked to Chinese banks have continued. In 2012, the then director of the electricity supply company during the construction of Kozjak was charged with corruption and money laundering. While Nikola Gruevski was prime minister, construction of the Kičevo-Ohrid motorway began through the Chinese company Sinohydro. This led to the creation of a special prosecutor's office. The corruption scandal involving the Chinese company came to light following telephone wiretaps. These trends of penetration by Chinese financial capital into Macedonia have persisted for more than 30 years. This became particularly suspicious in the recent period with the loan taken from Hungary last year, when analysts obtained information that the Hungarian bank had first taken a €1 billion loan from China, half of which was then granted as a loan to Macedonia.
Од унгарската банка земала 1 милиарда евра кредит од Кина, а пола милиарда евра беше даден како кредит на Македонија.
Когато Европейският съюз поставя ясни условия, македонските политици се обръщат на изток. И когато институциите са слаби и зависими от чужди сили, дълговете не са просто икономически въпрос. Те стават геополитически инструмент. Бившият македонски премиер Никола Груевски и Виктор Орбан изградиха удобен политически съюз преди 15 години, който на практика ликвидира аспирациите на тогавашна Република Македония за евроинтеграция. През 2018 година съденият за корупция Груевски, управлявал 10 години с помощ от Русия и Китай, избяга в Унгария в багажника на кола в компанията на унгарски дипломати. Орбан публично защити бягството му и го нарече вълнуващ криминален роман. Унгария отказва да го екстрадира, въпреки международните заповеди за арест по линия на Интерпол. Груевски и Орбан лобираха за мрежа от китайски инфраструктурни проекти – ЖП коридори, магистрали, мостове и водни канали в унисон с общата им така наречена консервативна платформа, опонираща на Брюксел и Вашингтон. Вместо да устоява европейските стандарти и върховенството на закона, двойката превърна региона в коридор за китайската експанзия, наред с Сърбия на Александър Вучич.
The first person from Hungary who got on the US sanction list for circumventing sanctions and helping Russia was Nikola Gruevski from North Macedonia and his Hungarian company that was founded in the suburbs of Budapest. And this is so absurd that they bring the guy here who has zero connections to Hungary. We have zero interest in keeping him, yet the government finances him and provides for him, so he goes on finding a business that actually violates the sanctions and he gets on the sanction list. Well done, perfect timing.
We will be glad to find Mr. Gruevski and to meet him. He decided not to be high profile in Budapest, but anytime. He's here.
Why would a Macedonian politician flee to Hungary?
Because this is a friendly country, open to anyone.
След падането на Груевски, страната пое курс към нормализация, но с управлението на неговия най-добър ученик Християн Мицкоски от 2024 година до сега стана ясно, че моделът никога не си е тръгвал. Лицето му беше разкрито отново с нови дългове, нови зависимости и нови заплахи. Унгарският клон на Експортно-импортната банка на Китай управлява разпределението на средствата от заема за 1 милиард евро чрез Македонската банка за развитие.
Стратешка корупција на одредени сомнителни финансиски текови.
Due to strategic corruption and suspicious financial flows, the latest report of the European Parliament sent a strong signal to the new government of the Republic of Macedonia to exercise caution and not allow any further penetration of Chinese capital or Russian influence into our country.
Истинският проблем не е само в парите. Проблемът е в това кой контролира информацията, обществените настроения и перспективата за бъдещето.
As mentioned in the latest European report, undeniably present and something we were aware of, there have been numerous hybrid threats from Russian influence, from its intelligence services, and from the links between Russia and China with Hungary and Serbia. Such influence in the Republic of Macedonia gives rise to a certain deviation, a search for alternative paths should Macedonia not continue on its course toward the European Union.
Алтернативни патишта доколку Македонија не го продолжи патот кон Европската унија.
Сърбия използва Северна Македония като сателит. Това е част от проекта Сръбски свят на Александър Вучич. Модерното име на старата цел за сръбски хегемонизъм на Балканите. Но в него ключовите инвеститори вече не са сръбски. Те са китайски. Сръбски свят вече е част и от пътя на Куприната. Бившият вече сръбски министър на транспорта Горан Весич лично призна, че режимът на Вучич е участвал в спирането на изграждането на коридор 8, който трябва да свърже Черно море с Адриатика и е от критична важност за военната мобилност на НАТО на Балканите в полза на коридор 10. От друга страна, Мицкоски и негови министри настояваха за прехвърляне на европейски средства от връзката с България към тази с Сърбия и Унгария.
Српското влијание е долгогодишен проект кој го чувствуваме сите во Македонија и обидот на наметнување на председателот Вучич.
Serbian influence is a long-standing project that we all feel in Macedonia, including President Vučić's attempt to impose a certain portrayal of brotherly peoples and specific assistance to Macedonia during crisis situations. Serbia always uses this to emphasize the very good relations between Serbia and Macedonia at the expense of the other neighboring countries.
Меѓу Србија и Македонија за сметка на останатите соседи.
Китайските пари в Северна Македония трябваше да се използват за общински проекти. До момента не е построена дори една детска площадка. Унгария е достатъчно голяма икономика, за да си позволи изплащането на подобни заеми, но не така стоят нещата с по-малките. В Сърбия капанът вече е щракнал. Но страната не е сама. Китайското влияние пълзи през границите – към Македония, към Босна, към Черна гора. И целият регион се превръща в стратегическа зона на зависимост. Черна гора е една от най-малките икономики в Европа, но в очите на Пекин тя е стратегически важно парче от пъзела. Маршрут от Адриатика към Балканите, през който минават инвестиции, кредити и зависимост. През 2014 година правителството в Подгорица подписа договор с Ексимбанк на Китай за изграждането на първия участък от автомагистралата Бар-Боляре. Стойността $944 милиона. Срок неясен, условия непрозрачни. Строежът започва през 2015 година, а вноските са убийствени – 33 милиона евро месечно до април 2027 година. Само за първия участък, който не свързва нито столицата, нито границите с съседните държави.
The problem is not that these projects in Hungary are financed through loans. Many other countries do the same. The real issue lies in the details and conditions of the loans. When they are classified, we know nothing about them, and that's precisely when it becomes clear that these loans must be repaid under extremely unfavourable terms, which can push a country into bankruptcy. That is what happened, for example, in Montenegro.
В разгара на кризата през 2021 година Черна гора бе на ръба на неплатежоспособност. Страната потърси помощ от Европейския съюз за преструктуриране на дълга. През това време китайските държавни компании продължиха строителството. Лошо проектирани тунели, свлачища, екологични щети, а политическата класа в Подгорица беше поставена в шах. И докато Орбан и Вучич използват китайските пари, за да се еманципират от Брюксел, Черна гора бе накосана да плати с бъдещето си, изпадайки в дългов капан. В Босна и Херцеговина китайското присъствие е най-вече в ентитета Република Сръбска. Инвестициите там надхвърлят $3 милиарда. Сред най-големите проекти е автомагистралата Баня Лука Приедор за 300 милиона евро, реализирана чрез непрозрачен договор с китайската компания Шандонг и съпътствана от обвинения в корупция. В енергийния сектор Китай отпуска десетки милиони евро заеми за водно-електрически централи с китайски подизпълнители. В Тузла планираха финансиране на блок 7 на ТЕЦ с кредит от над 600 милиона евро от Ексимбанк и китайски строители. Проектът бе спрян след експертни предупреждения за вреди върху здравето на населението и икономическа нерентабилност. Докато в Западните Балкани Китай разчита на кредити и индустриални проекти, в Гърция той изгради постоянна база на присъствие. ЖП линията от Солун до Будапеща ще послужи за нейното разширяване.
But I think the bigger problem is not necessarily this one single railway line. The bigger problem is that, according to certain estimates, China already controls more than 10% of all the European ports. So, when it comes to critical infrastructure, that is probably even more concerning and problematic in case of a conflict that our ports are at least survived by the Chinese side. So, when it comes to the Hungarian section, I don't think that it's a real national security issue in this sense. It's not even a real financial trouble because the loan is big, so it's something like 1.7 billion euros. But unlike in the case of some other countries of the Western Balkans, this money is peanuts compared to the size of the Hungarian economy. So we are not endangered by a debt trap diplomacy here, unlike in some of the countries of the Western Balkans.
През 2009 година, насред дълговата криза, гръцкото правителство предостави на китайската държавна компания COSCO концесия за 35 години върху пристанище Пирея. Днес китайците вече контролират 67% от него. Това е един от най-големите товарни хъбове в Европа и Средиземноморието. Ключова точка по един пояс, един път. COSCO инвестира близо 2 милиарда евро в нейната модернизация. Китай получи реален контрол върху един от морските коридори на НАТО, съществен за военната мобилност на Балканите. Синдикатите в Пирея многократно сигнализират за лоши условия на труд и настояват за по-добри мерки за безопасност, но контролните органи не оказват сериозен натиск върху COSCO. За разлика от повечето държави в Европейския съюз, където контейнерните терминали се използват от няколко конкуриращи се оператори, в Пирея пристанищната инфраструктура е практически монополизирана. В периода до 2021 година гръцкият флот е финансиран от Китай с над 70 милиарда долара чрез лизинги, преференциални кредити и заеми, което превръща Пекин в най-големия морски кредитор в Средиземноморието.
Зад мен се намира едно от най-големите пристанища в Будапеща по поречието на Дунава.
ЧПЛ Freeport Logistics Park е ключов речен логистичен хъб с активно участие на китайски компании, който на практика свързва гръцките пристанища с Централна Европа чрез ЖП и шосейна мрежа. Тя обслужва търговията между Китай и Европейският съюз в рамките на един пояс, един път. Как обаче режимът на Виктор Орбан успява да лавира между топлите връзки с САЩ на Тръмп и тези с Китай? Създава ли се напрежение по оста Будапеща-Вашингтон?
Based on rumors, Mr. Orban has already had to face the reality that Mr. Trump was very kind to him during his campaign in the United States, but way less interested in teaming up or meeting or maintaining this friendship with Mr. Orban right now when he's already back into the White House. But I think they're doing the very same mistake they did back during the first time of Donald Trump. They believe that in the true an amicable relationship to the Hungarian government, they can change the foreign policy of the Hungarian government. And I think they will have to wake up. Sooner or later, they will see that the Hungarian government is very good at, this dance. Mr. Orban called his foreign policy the peacock's dance, and the peacock's dance means that, he turns to a country that he wants to mesmerize, rattles his feathers, and shows, respect. And of course, I take into consideration your interest. And when that particular country feels, compelled and feels that okay, then Hungary is our friends, then Mr. Orban turns away to another country. So this balancing game has been going on for 15 years, and I don't think Mr. Orban feels the urge to change it. Despite the fact that I believe, as a foreign policy analyst, I believe that the time is over. This balancing foreign policy is not sustainable anymore. It was serving pretty well the interest of the Orban regime in the 2010s, when the world was relatively happy, money was flowing free, there was abundance, there was everything, so nobody really cared about how a relatively small and relatively insignificant country in Central and Eastern Europe tries to navigate these rocky waters. But now the time is very different, the era is very different. The United States, I think, puts it very bluntly that you are now either with us or against us. Now they're still trying to convince Orban through the nice way, but I think there will be a moment when the United States will turn sour and they will feel that they have to use other tools to convince Mr. Orban. And then Mr. Orban will feel, I think, himself being between a stone and a very hard place. Whether it happens before 2026, or after 2026, the elections in Hungary, that's a big question. Maybe it's not Mr. Orban to deal with it anymore.
В регион, където почти всяка държава е обвързана с китайски заеми, инфраструктура или идеологически наратив, Албания изглежда като изключение.
Albania is the country with the least penetration of Chinese investments in the region and in Europe. So pretty much Albania does not have any major or even minor investments from Chinese companies or Chinese state-owned companies in the country. It's a conscious choice. We've been great friends with China, as you know, in our brilliant communist times. We broke with the Soviet Union, then we joined the big Chinese Albanian friendship, and we had this expression that it sounds funny now, but at the time it was said seriously, saying that 1 billion Chinese and 3 million Albanians, will change the world together. And we know of that experience. It wasn't the greatest experience you would have. So from 1991, Albania has been very much oriented towards the West and the United States.
Докато съседите подписват договори с Китай, едни с ентусиазъм, други от нужда, Албания не приема лесни пари без дългосрочни гаранции. Така ли е наистина? През 2016 година китайската компания Geojade придоби за над $500 милиарда канадската Bankers Petroleum, оператор на най-голямото петролно находище в Албания, заедно с дългосрочната концесия. Година по-късно China Everbright придоби 100% от концесията на летището в Тирана, първият случай на пълен китайски контрол върху национален аеропорт в региона. По време на пандемията компанията се оттегли, реализирайки огромна печалба.
We don't have loans, we don't have big investments, we have no debts in that sense or investments that come with other strings. It's not the same in some other countries in the region, some of the investments or loyalties, but I think the more active the EU is, the more strategic when it comes to funds for the Western Balkans, when it comes to moving with the EU accession, the less space will there be for other forces in the region. And it's important to understand that.
Албания остава извън коридора на дълга, но ако Европейският съюз не предложи собствени алтернативи, вакуумът няма да остане празен дълго. Пекин продължава усилията си за укрепване на позициите си по Адриатическото крайбрежие, както чрез двустранни инициативи, така и в рамките на сътрудничеството между Китай и страните от Централна и Източна Европа. Пекин успя да затвърди реално присъствие и в Хърватия, но в ограничен брой проекти, сред които най-значимо става Пелешачкият мост. Той беше завършен през 2022 година, изграден от Китай, но платен от Европейския съюз. Паралелно с това, Китай успешно стъпва и в енергийния сектор – соларни и ветропаркове. Тези проекти са частично финансирани с европейски средства, но се изпълняват от китайски фирми. Когато държавите не успяват да изплащат заемите си към китайски банки, Пекин често получава контрол върху стратегически активи. Най-известният пример е пристанище Хамбантота в Шри-Ланка, което през 2017 година беше придобито от китайска компания за 99 години след неизплатен заем от близо $1,5 милиарда. Подобна практика се прилага и из цяла Африка, където десетки пристанища и летища вече са под китайско управление. Китай вече не е просто кредитор. Той се превръща в оператор на чужди икономики. Въпросът е дали ще успее да приложи тази стратегия и в Европа.
When Viktor Orban's political and personal ambitions did not fit into the democratic expectations and rules of the European Union, and this began about 10 years ago, and when Orban realised that this had very serious financial and economic consequences for Hungary, that the country would no longer automatically receive all the funds, he saw that he could easily take advantage of the fact that Hungary is a member of the European Union. The fact that such a large country as China even talks to us and accepts us as a partner is only possible because we are part of the European Union. Otherwise, this would never have happened.
Postavlja se pitanje, da li treba Srbija svoje resurse
The question arises whether everyone in Serbia should be involved in mineral extraction. I am in favor, but only if it leaves the country's environment in a condition that allows future generations to live normally. All questions on this matter remain open.
Da će oni tu moći normalno da žive. I sve je otvoreno.
Economic prosperity, or the fact that you and your family may have a better social or economic situation in the short term, will never compensate for the long-term loss of your country's future, young people and moral standards. So please do not compromise. Do not think that the Orban system is working. It does not. It was just covered by EU money. Now it's gone. The king is naked.
That's the reason I'm saying that China needs Europe, maybe more than before, more than ever before, in terms of selling more stuff to Europe. But the problem is that Europe understands that if America stops to be the so-called final consumer of the world, or ultimate consumer of the world, Europe will be next. That is supposed to absorb all the Chinese excess capacity. So I think these are the problems between Europe and China. We don't want to buy so many things from the Chinese anymore because it has a detrimental impact on the European economy. But also, many European member states believe that if Trump is against Europe right now, then the most logical move would be to turn to China.
Úgy tudnám összefoglalni, hogy Orbán Viktor
Orban prefers, or rather consciously chooses, the rejected totalitarian states over democracy, solely for the sake of preserving his power. We must carefully consider whom we put into power. Unfortunately, we have lacked experience in this, but it is high time to learn from our own mistakes.
Jer Kini je dala možda i previše. Srbija je deo Evropske unije.
Serbia has given too much to China. Serbia should be part of the EU. It cannot be part of China because it is too far away. To what extent this alliance, this marriage, will bring the Serbs more benefits or more harm will become clear over the next 5 years.
Икономическата мощ и гъвкавата политика на Китай намират плодородна почва на Балканите и в Унгария, неразделно свързана с региона. Може да хвърлите вината на Черна гора, че никой друг, освен самата тя, не носи отговорност за подписания договор по заема. Или да попитате защо държавите да не се възползват от инвестиции, макар и от комунистически режим. Можете да посочите и слабостите на тромавия Европейски съюз и бавното му разширяване. Или да попитате с какво китайската държава е виновна за огромната корупция в балканските държави, известни с тази своя черта от векове. Справо ще припомните, че китайското присъствие в Пирея е донесло икономически ползи. Истината е, че Китай не е просто гост на Балканите. Той разпъва своята червена копринена нишка от Пекин до Будапеща, от Белград до Скопие и от Пирея до Подгорица. Пекин търси съюзници и ги намира тук, в лицето на режимите на Орбан, Вучич и Мицкоски. Китайският влак на Балканите не само движи икономически проекти, а подхранва антиевропейските сили и техните проекти, разделяйки посоката на региона. Дали инвестициите на Пекин са толкова успешни, често решават не цифрите, а празните слова на така наречените лидери. Не оставяйте друг да ви диктува бъдещето. Изводите направете сами.